Good morning and welcome to the 2022 Pain Relief Summit, Holistic Pain Relief Summit. I'm thrilled that you've taken the time to join us. My name is Trish Rossiter and I'm your host. The series is for men and women suffering with pain and who want to get back to living a normal life without the need for medications and invasive procedures. If you haven't already done so, I invite you to join our Facebook group. Every day of the summit, there will be a thread of a summary of the speakers' presentations, and there's an opportunity to ask questions. We'd also love to hear as well what your best takeaway is for the day. But today, I'm delighted to introduce you to Deanna Hansen. I learned about Deanna through a friend of mine who is working with Deanna remotely. So her company is called, oh dear, what's your company called, Deanna?
Block Therapy Limited.
Block Therapy Limit.
Yeah.
I block out. Anyway, welcome, Deanna. Thank you very much for joining us. Would you like to tell us some information about yourself, how you got started in this? Because I understand you actually were the creator of this company and the creator of this method.
Yes, I am. Thank you. So first of all, pleasure to be here and to share with your community. I love doing this. So this process started for me at the turn of the century, almost 22 years ago now. Yes. So at the time, I was an athletic therapist working with athletes. And I had a very successful practice, but my personal well-being was not good. I was 50 pounds overweight, struggling with anxiety, depression. And the harder that I worked to get my body to be healthy, the worse it got. So I made some big changes at the time I was turning 30. I'm 52 now. And one of those changes was to quit my addictive habits. Which was necessary. But what that resulted in was crazy anxiety attacks, because now I was having to look at my life from a completely sober perspective. And I had, created a lot of really challenging opportunities in my life. So these anxiety attacks were ramping up. And this one in particular was extremely stressful, to the point where I actually thought I was going to die, because I was literally frozen with fear. I didn't know if I could catch my breath. So for some reason, I intuitively dove my hand into my abdomen. I let out a gasp, a huge exhalation, and I connected to pain. But the pain brought me out of my crazy thinking. It brought me back to the ground. I knew I was safe. And so I continued to intuitively explore in my belly with just following my intuition. And what was fascinating was what I felt in there was scar tissue marbled throughout the tissue. And so as a body worker, I was very familiar with scar tissue working on patients. And yet I had never touched my belly, because that was really where I stored most of my weight. I literally hated the area. And I had never had any injuries or surgeries there. So now I'm tapping into all of this scar tissue, which gave me all of these aha moments. First of all, I recognized, no wonder when I'm coming home from a 5-mile run, dripping wet with sweat, my belly still feels cold. And then I recognized how this scar tissue was limiting the ability to metabolize what was going on in that area, because it was basically blocked from flow. So the first night I spent about 45 minutes in that space, and I felt really calm, which was lovely, because that was not my nature. I woke up the next morning, a little tender, but still feeling really calm. So I went to work on patients all day, really excited to come back home that evening and explore a little further. And after the second night of, spending maybe 30 to 45 minutes doing that same intuitive work, when I stood up, I felt taller. And I went and I looked at myself in the mirror, and my belly was flatter than it had looked in years. I started to cry. I was so excited. So this became the new addiction for me. So every time I would come home from work, I would spend hours working on myself, exploring. And within 2 weeks, my chronic low back pain was going away. My depression was lifting. I was actually starting to feel really hopeful about life. So I started flipping my patients onto their backs because I had a really good practice of clients, but I typically worked where people had pain. If they came in with neck pain, I would work on their neck or their shoulder or whatever. So now I'm working in a completely different way with them. And I started getting these phenomenal results. So over time, this started to attract other therapists to want to learn my technique. And it was about 2 years in when one of my patients said, "You should really be teaching this." And I thought, I don't even really know what I'm doing. I'm just going with the flow in my tissue. But by then it had become a full body approach that I was doing on myself and on my patients as well. So I started really paying attention to what my hands were doing, as well as doing some research and learning more about energy. And what I recognized was my hands were following the Fibonacci sequence, which is basically the sequence of everything that, the architecture of nature, the spiral. This is the Fibonacci sequence, the galaxies, the Nautilus seashells, how flowers, how bodies form. Also, though, how we age. We age in a forward rotational direction, either falling one way or the other, depending on what side we're dominant, as well as a number of other factors. So I recognized I was actually tapping in to this natural creation of nature and very effectively unzipping the seams of time, creating flow to cells previously blocked and creating a rejuvenation. So that was 22 years ago that this whole thing began, and that's how it started for me.
Amazing. Amazing. Wow. So when we stop and listen and tune into our intuition, you never know what we're going to come up with, right?
That's right.
I'm hearing this from so many of the other speakers too. Often instigated by pain, but having to say, okay, enough already. Let's clean up this act and then just spend time. And mindfulness is such the buzzword these days, but it is the key to opening our whole head and our mind and our body.
And what I've learned along the way, it's really all about the flow. So we have trillions of cells in the body. And I'll just explain the fascia a little bit from the perspective that we have, so people really have a good understanding. So, and this is the way that I understand fascia. So it's almost as though it's the cell membrane of every cell interconnected to every other cell. It's the communication system in the body. And when there's optimal space in the body, there's optimal flow, and every cell has its correct alignment. And if we were trained from the beginning to be conscious diaphragmatic breathers and understand how to support the body's proper foundations, we would be able to maintain this correct cellular alignment. But the reality is most people aren't that. And so gravity is this constant force pulling us down. So if we aren't adhering to correct postural foundations, we start falling in to the internal space in the body and we start winding down. We basically become shorter and wider over time. And the fascia is here to support and protect us. So again, most people are dominant on one side of the body. So if you overuse one side, you tend to shift your weight to the other side to keep that side free for action. So as we start tipping off balance, the fascia will actually grip and adhere to structures and to bone to create stability in the body. And it does so with a 2,000 pound per square inch magnetic force. So when we are held out of alignment, that is what we're dealing with, a 2,000 pound per square inch force. So if you think about that, that's intense. So the really great thing about it is, though, it's a magnetic force. Now, if you had magnets far enough apart from each other, they don't have any attraction toward each other. You bring them close enough together and they seal with the force. If you try to pull them away from each other, it's not going to happen, but you can slide them apart. So when I'm going through this process of teaching how to melt through the adhesions in the fascia to get to the root at the bone, we teach people to follow that Fibonacci sequence, that spiral pattern. And initially, I was teaching people to use their hands, my therapists on other patients, but my real passion was teaching self-care. And initially, I attempted to teach people to use their own hands on their bodies as I did, but there was a lot of limiting factors to that. So about 12 years ago, intuitively, this has all been a very intuitive process for me. I was coming home from work, and at that time I was physically very tired. I was seeing patients for 8 to 10 hours a day, coming home, working on myself with my hands. So once a week I was having these restorative yoga classes, and I had this lovely teacher, and she was putting me into a side lying twist over top of a bolster, and she cautioned me that this goes really deep. And I thought, well, for already 10 years, I've been diving extremely deeply into my body with my hands. So I didn't even really feel it. And there was an Iyengar yoga block that was a rectangular wooden block in my apartment. So I grabbed it and I said, I want to lie on that. And she's like, that's crazy. And I'm like, no, just trust me. Let me lie on this. So as I'm doing it, I'm recognizing that, oh my gosh, I don't need to use my hands on my body. I can move my body into this tool. Now, the challenge was it had sharp corners. So I couldn't go as deeply as I wanted. So for the next 2 years, I spent time with one of my therapists who is also a woodworker, and we designed the right size and shape of the tools for block therapy. So there's 2 of them. We've got the block buddy and then the block baby. So 2 different sizes. And the lovely thing is they have these nice, beautiful rounded corners so that we can comfortably dive deep through the layers of fascia to get to the root at the bone. So that once we release that root, then we get blood and oxygen flowing into that space so we can get those cells properly fed and cleaned. And then we also teach people how to support proper postural foundations. So the goal is that we bring all of the cells back to where they're supposed to be positioned. And then that creates optimal space in the body. And space is where all the magic happens. Through the compression, we become distorted in our perception of emotional issues as well as how we think about certain things. So when we can clear out all those adhesions, get rid of all the toxins and the debris that's been accumulating over years, we start to experience life from a completely different perspective, as though every moment is unique, instead of getting caught up in the dramas and the habits and the patterns that basically took us down.
Right. So is this something then, Deanna, that you use for your whole body, or do you focus on your pain point, or do you use your head, your feet and hands, or?
We do absolutely everything. And the thing to really understand about pain is that there's pain sites and there's cause sites. So again, when I was trained as a therapist, I mean, you came in with shoulder pain and I'd be working in and around the shoulder, but I've learned along the way that there's a very different scenario that we have to understand. And actually, the first time I really recognized this was one of the very, very first challenges that I did. It was a 21-day challenge with my very first program. We did it through the Christmas season, and we were focusing on weight loss. Can we actually, just with blocking, get people to decrease and improve their size and shape, even as they are indulging in the holiday season? So I think we had over 80 people registered for this, and all but 3 changed in the positive direction, and 3 didn't change at all. And fortunately, 2 of those people lived in Winnipeg. And I'm thinking, okay, well, why did everyone else and you didn't? So I brought them in because I wanted to see what was going on. And in this program, we were basically focusing on the core and the rib cage. So when I looked at their bodies, I recognized that their calves, the fascia and how it wound around the calves and distorted the alignment of their feet, was really locking them away from being able to properly breathe and clean their bodies out. So after I got them to work on their calves, things had changed. So that was when I really recognized that fascia is different than what we think. And we really have to understand how everything is interconnected. And it really comes down to proper flow into all areas. So the diaphragm muscle, I just want to talk a little bit about breathing, because this is really the key. It's one of the 3 pillars of block therapy. So the creating space is the first pillar, which is done through the process of lying on the tool for a minimum of 3 minutes. We use pain as our guide as we search. It's all very slow and safe, and you can do it on a bed. But as you dive through the layers on this tool, connecting to your breath, you are literally creating heat from the pressure over time, and then also from the training that we give you with proper diaphragmatic breathing. So I'm just going to bring my screen down for a sec so we can see. So the diaphragm muscle is a plate that basically is at the base of the rib cage. When we inhale, it moves down. When we exhale, it moves up. And when we're breathing diaphragmatically, we're giving all of these organs a continual massage. Now, what happens over time, pain, fear, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath. And who's not living in a 24/7 world of pretty much pain, fear, and stress right now? So what happens is this muscle becomes weak, and over time we collapse. We fall in, everything gets displaced outward. We don't now have this activity going on through here, and we start breathing through the muscles of the upper chest. Now, the reason that this is a challenge, at the base of the lungs is where the majority of the oxygen receptor sites reside. They're called alveoli. So if we're breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, we're not bringing the air deeply enough into the lungs to reach that bed of abundance of oxygen receptor sites. So when we teach people to breathe diaphragmatically, you can feed the body up to 6 times the amount of oxygen. And oxygen is the key. I mean, if we're deprived of oxygen for up to 5 minutes, we can die.
Yeah.
Every cell is really a mini brain or a mini body, really. It's all, everything in the nature is a mirror of itself. So when we aren't breathing diaphragmatically lifelong, we start to compress. Gravity starts winning. Think of blowing up a balloon. When it's fully blown up, it's round, it glows, it almost defies gravity, but take half the air out, it becomes heavy, it falls to the ground, it wrinkles, dust can get caught in the wrinkles. And that's ultimately what happens to the cells over time if we're not breathing properly. But we can train the body to be conscious diaphragmatic breathers and essentially defy gravity, because gravity is this constant force pulling us down. The full exhalation is that counterforce to gravity. And what was so amazing, in 2014, they did a study in Australia proving that 84% of weight loss comes through proper exhalation. So that was, I was so excited to hear that. Yes, because we are literally moving with every single breath the waste out of our body. And I've learned a whole different scenario of weight loss because, again, I was the person doing the work in my 20s. I was running aerobics, Tai Bo. I was doing 400 sit-ups a day, doing weights, like whatever it was I could try. And as an athletic therapist, I had access to like all the different exercises and the information, as well as eating. All of these different things. I was getting bigger the harder that I worked. And it was like, why are the rules of weight loss not applying to me? But I recognized that I wasn't breathing. So I was frozen in my body and there was no metabolism. So when we connect to that diaphragmatic breath, it's like turning on the body's internal furnace. And that's really the key, because if we want to have a system that flows with ease, we need to keep the entire body heated to the right temperature. And when we start breathing through the muscles of the upper chest, it's like breathing with a space heater instead of a furnace. It's not going to heat the full body. So then we start to, again, decrease in that cellular oxygenation. Those cells become decompressed or compressed, and that creates blocks to flow. So cells not receiving optimal blood and oxygen, they're going to start to give a little pain signal. They're going to say, hey, I'm hungry. You're asking me to do a big job, keeping you alive and trying to help you thrive, but you're starving me. So you get a little signal. It's like the baby crying. But most people are trained to fear pain, to avoid pain, to mask pain. What we teach people to do is become pain seekers, because pain is just a language. And if we understand pain for its value, we have a very different relationship to it. And there's a pain fear cycle. If you have pain that you don't understand, we start to hold the breath. Pain, fear, and stress cause us to reactively hold the breath. If you don't have a way to deal with that, fear sets in. Fear continues to create that compression, that holding of the breath. And then we're in this pain fear cycle. So when you learn to see pain for the value that it is, we take the fear out of the equation. And now pain is simply information to give you to know what to do with your body. And what is so great about understanding the fascia is understanding that there's cause sites to the pain, because we want to really release what's pulling you out of alignment so we can stop the body from responding to those forces. And just a really simple example would be if I had your arm and I was holding it like this for a month, that shoulder would be exhausted. And if you went every week and you had a treatment on that shoulder, you might feel good for a little while, but it's still going to be tired. But if I let go and let that shoulder come back, now the reason for the pain is gone, and then real healing can begin. So that's the process of block therapy. It's looking at the body as a whole and addressing everything from head to toe.
Right. So I just have a quick question. I was a nurse and, we were always taught when there's pain, there's something wrong. So I absolutely hear what you're saying. If you put yourself in a position for a long time, of course, you're going to get more pain. What about, I don't know, say appendix or endometriosis, for example. So that has to do with the fascia as well then, I guess.
Yeah, the fascia innervates every single cell in the body, nerve fibers, blood vessels, muscle, tendons, ligaments, bone. So it's basically this matrix that connects absolutely everything together. So with endometriosis, for example, I've got a lot of programs for pelvis and pelvic floor. What's important to understand is every month with our cycle, if we're properly aligned, gravity assists. It assists the elimination and the sloughing off with our monthly cycle. However, if we are out of alignment, so like let's say this is the hip joints and they're positioned properly in the body, there's optimal space for everything and gravity does its job. When we start to stand, we start to twist, and then we have a twisting inside the pelvis. So with every month, we're not eliminating all of that tissue that's supposed to be released month after month. So it starts to build up, and it's really tissue that's not supposed to be in there. So then it creates problems. And that's really what endometriosis is. And we have people doing this all the time that have this. And then what will initially happen is when they start this process, they can start bleeding a little more heavily because the body starts to slough off the tissue that it wasn't able to on a monthly basis and clean itself out. So it's really all about understanding, again, that proper flow and where we're congested and why that congestion is causing us issues and pain. Now, of course, if you have something like an appendix attack, of course, you need to go and you need to see what you need to do with that. But again, this process, we always start blocking in the belly, because again, when we are not in alignment and we're not breathing, we compress. So we really want to start and understand how to engage that proper diaphragmatic breath. And there's really only 2 rules in block therapy. It's very much about a self-exploration, and it's an intuitive process. We have programs to guide you, but as you do it, you start to learn what you need to do for your own health. But your breath is your guide. If you are doing a position and you're breathing in a relaxed way, you will be feeding and healing the cells. If you're doing something that it takes that relaxed breath away because it's too painful, that's your body saying, no, we need you to back off and do it less intensely. You can do this work on a bed. You can do it seated in a chair. And we have an amazing community, almost 7,000 people in our Facebook community, all blockers that are all there to provide support for people along the way, as well as I have an amazing team to guide people. And that's what we're here to do, is make sure people are understanding what's going on with pain and how to deal with the healing crises when they come up, because those are real. When we start putting positive energy in the body, the negative energy starts coming out, and it can be physical. It can be a skin rash. It can be, like with endometriosis, increased bleeding. It can be a change in pain in your body as you're starting to shift back to proper alignment. It can be emotional. It can be dreams coming up to the surface or nightmares coming up. That's one thing for me. I used to have tremendously scary nightmares when I was younger and a total mess. And then when they come up now, very infrequently, I recognize that, oh, I've tapped into something deeper and it's coming up, so I can acknowledge it and say goodbye. So it's really just understanding, again, pain and your body's response to compression over time in a very different way, and having a very specific process to deal with that.
Right. That's incredible information. I'm so excited to have learned about it, because I am definitely going to try it. It's interesting. I had endometriosis, but it started like when I was 12, and I was in agony every month.
Wow.
Up until I was diagnosed with endometriosis. Then they surgically went in and cleaned it up. It was doing a lot of damage in there.
Yeah.
And I had referred pain in my legs. So I'm sure even as that continued year after year after year after year, it just adds more insult to injury.
Absolutely. And again, I really see the calves and feet as being such a massive cause site for everything up the chain. So let's say, for example, you have a frozen shoulder. You're going to be pulled in a certain alignment. The rib cage is the direct foundation of the shoulders and the neck. So the alignment of the rib cage matters when it comes to something like a frozen shoulder, but the alignment of the rib cage is also driven by the feet, the calves and the feet. And I teach my therapists how to assess bodies so they can learn the cause sites and give people the proper prescription, so they're not simply working on the painful areas. So if you look at people, the majority of people pronate. they collapse in at the ankle. And if you're looking at the body, one is going to act more like a flat tire, one is going to be more like an anchor. So the foot that pronates more, often there's a bigger bunion on that foot. It's pulling away from the body. And again, because the fascia is here to support and protect us and keep us upright, the other side of the body anchors. Kind of like when you're walking a dog and it doesn't want to go with you, it sits back in its hind legs. So as one side of the body starts to draw away, the other side starts to anchor. And now we have this internal tension happening. So as the legs start to splay and shift from proper foundation, that affects everything up the chain. So now you've got your hip joints again in your pelvis, they start twisting and getting pulled. And now they're compressing the organs of reproduction, the organs of elimination from that perspective. They also pull the upper body forward into that system. So now we get a compression and the weight of the rib cage coming forward and squeezing everything in the core of the body. So it really, again, is understanding, like, how do we support that flow, that proper alignment? And we do need to look at the full body as a whole in order to accomplish that.
Yeah. Interesting. I had foot surgery on both of my feet in my early 20s. So it's, yeah, it all fits in together, right? It all makes sense.
It absolutely does.
Okay, well, thank you, Deanna, very, very much. Now, I understand you have a free gift for our listeners. If you'd like to share some information about that, you're invited to.
Sure. If I can actually share the other, and then the free gift will make more sense. So,
sure.
So if people are interested in doing block therapy, you can either have one or both blocks. Highly recommend both, because if you're over 5 feet, for sure, the buddy. If you're under 5 feet, for sure, the baby. But both are lovely. I have a bunch of double blocking classes in my membership. Also, everybody's body is different in where we're compressed. A lot of people have little space between the ribs and the pelvis because of that collapse. So the smaller block feels nicer at times. There's so many uses. So we have the program. You get 9 videos that you keep lifelong that covers the full body, and that alone is going to change your life. And what's so lovely is you feel the changes immediately. In that very first class, you're going to feel a difference in how you breathe. You're going to feel a lifting of your rib cage. There's an order to how we do things. And then after you're through those 9 classes, which again, you can take your time, you've got them forever. You also get a 2-week free trial into our membership, where we have hundreds of hours of classes, guided programs, and again, the support of the community to really give you that guidance. Now, for people that don't want to necessarily jump right into that, this is where the free gift comes in. We call it our sampler program. So it's 9 videos that range 8 to 15 minutes in length, and we teach you using a rolled up towel. And it's amazing because the density of the rolled up towel is really quite effective. And on our Google reviews, we have so many incredible reviews from this sampler program. So this is the gift. So if anybody wants to simply try this before they decide to make a commitment, there's that to dive into, and you're going to see some changes right away just from the process of really learning how to connect to your proper breath. We teach postural foundations in there, as well as we do work through the full body to really open the main channel so that you can really get a sense of feeling that improved flow throughout.
Okay. I know several people I will be sending information to jump on so they can access this.
Wonderful.
Including myself. Yeah. Thanks for sharing your time, your information, your encouragement, the hope that you offer, through your words of experience. And for those tuning in, be sure to come back for the rest of the interviews on the Holistic Pain Relief Summit. Remember to access your free gift below. And it'll also be listed in the Facebook group. And if you know anyone who can benefit from these amazing speakers' experiences and information, they can join at holisticpainreliefsummit.com. And the recordings will be accessible for 24 hours after the presentation. Thanks. Lovely to meet you. I'm
nice
excited.
To meet you as well.
I can't wait to try. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Trish. Have a lovely day.
Bye-bye. You too.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.